Chicago. The year is 1893. The city is absolutely alive. Electric lights glow against the darkness like stars brought down from heaven. Elevated trains rattle through crowded streets. Horse-drawn carriages weave through a sea of strangers. Vendors shout, bands play, the smell of coal smoke drifts through the air. More than 27 million people will visit Chicago during the World's Columbian Exposition. For many, it's a glimpse into the future. For others, it will be the last trip they ever take. Because somewhere among the crowds, hidden in plain sight, walks a man with a pleasant smile and calm blue eyes. A man who introduces himself as a doctor, a businessman, a gentleman, a man trusted by neighbors and admired by acquaintances. But behind that smile lies something cold and calculating. His name is H. Holmes. And if the stories are true, he built a house designed for people to disappear. Sup creeps, and welcome back. I'm Noelle, your host and weirdo Wisconsinite of Creepy Confidential, a podcast delving into the mysterious realms of cryptids, cults, conspiracies, and other worldly creepy. Tonight, we're stepping into one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A tale filled with secret passages, vanished guests, insurance fraud, murder, deception, and enough unanswered questions to keep historians arguing for more than a century. Some call him America's first serial killer. Others argue that many of the legends surrounding him have been exaggerated over time. But even after separating fact from fiction, the truth remains terrifying enough. So lock your doors, dim the lights, and let's enter the murder castle. Long before he became H. Holmes, he was Herman Webster Mudgett. He was born in 1861 in a quiet town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire. At first glance, his childhood seemed ordinary, but stories that emerged after his arrest painted a darker picture. Neighbors described him as extremely intelligent, the kind of child who learned quickly and remembered everything. Yet, there were rumors. Stories whispered years later. One tale claimed that older children once forced him into a doctor's office and made him stand face to face with a human skeleton. Now, personally, if that was me, I wouldn't have a problem with that, but maybe I'm a different kind of person, a different kind of kid. And that's where I worry that I have something in common, because the experience was meant to frighten him. Instead, something changed in him. According to the story, Holmes became fascinated. Whether the story is completely true remains uncertain, but one thing is undeniable. Death would become a recurring theme throughout his life. As a teenager, Holmes repeatedly developed an interest in anatomy and medicine. He excelled academically and eventually enrolled in medical school at the University of Michigan. To anyone looking from the outside, he appeared ambitious, but behind the scenes, investigators later uncovered evidence suggesting he may have already begun experimenting with fraud. Some reports indicate Holmes stole cadavers from medical laboratories. He would allegedly disfigure the bodies and present them as victims of accidents before collecting the insurance payouts. If true, it was an early glimpse into the mind of a man who viewed human beings not as people, but as opportunities. And the frightening part, he was getting away with it. Again and again and again, no arrests, no consequences, only success. And as the years passed, Herman Mudgett shed identities the way a snake sheds its skin. New jobs, new towns, new aliases. Eventually, he adopted the name that would become infamous: Henry Howard Holmes, or more simply, H. H. Holmes. The transformation was complete. The monster now had a new face, and soon he would find the perfect hunting ground: Chicago. In the late 19th century, Chicago was exploding with growth. Factories multiplied, businesses started to flourish, fortunes appeared overnight. Then came the World's Fair. Organizers intended the Columbian Exposition to celebrate 400 years since Columbus's arrival in the Americas. What they created stunned the world. Visitors called it the White City. Massive white buildings stretched across the landscape. Electric lights illuminated entire structures. For many visitors, it felt like stepping into the future. People arrived from every corner of the country. Imagine arriving in Chicago in 1893. Nobody knows you. You rent a room. You walk crowded streets. You disappear. Who notices? Who asks questions? Who even knows where to start looking? It's not like today where we can be tracked by traffic cams and cell phones and credit card usages, you name it. Easy ATMs. For a predator like Holmes, the World's Fair was more than an opportunity. Thousands upon thousands of strangers, transient workers, and tourists just moving about. A city overflowing with people who could vanish without immediate explanation. And in the middle of it all stood a peculiar building at the corner of 63rd Street. A building Holmes had spent years constructing. The building's workers claimed it was constantly changing. Many laborers quit before completion. The building would eventually become known by a chilling and now infamous nickname, the Murder Castle. Have you ever walked through an old building and you felt that strange sensation that something wasn't quite right? Maybe somebody was looking at you, somewhere, but you couldn't put your finger on it. A hallway that seemed too narrow, a room that felt strangely isolated, and a door that led to nowhere. If you've felt this before, then you already understand one of the most unsettling aspects of the Murder Castle. Because according to those who entered it, the building itself just seemed wrong. Not haunted or supernatural, just wrong. As if it had been designed according to a blueprint that nobody else was allowed to see. And in many ways, it had. The structure began as a relatively ordinary commercial building, located at the corner of 63rd Street and Wallace Avenue in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. Nothing about its exterior suggested what investigators would later discover inside. And to neighbors, Holmes appeared to be a successful businessman, friendly, polite, and professional. He ran a pharmacy on the ground floor and was known throughout the community. People trusted him. They simply saw a doctor because everybody trusts a doctor. That was exactly how Holmes wanted it: to blend in with every handshake, smile, or tip of the hat. Construction on the building continued for years, but there was something unusual about the process. Holmes frequently hired new contractors. Workers would arrive, complete part of the project, then suddenly find themselves dismissed from the project. Others would quit unexpectedly. Some reportedly complained that Holmes refused to explain what certain sections of the building were intended for. Rooms would be built, then altered. Walls added here and walls removed there. Staircases rerouted, new chambers were created and designed and would change constantly. No single construction crew ever saw the entire plan and or understood the full layout. Only Holmes knew exactly what the finished structure would look like. Investigators later reported discovering corridors that led nowhere, doors that opened into brick walls, and hidden rooms concealed behind false panels. Secret stairways, windowless chambers, and passageways connecting isolated parts of the building. Some rooms were allegedly fitted with gas lines that Holmes could control remotely. Whether every detail reported in newspapers was accurate still remains a matter of debate. The press of the 1890s often favored sensational stories, which isn't unlike today. I think they really go for the, whatever hits the vein and makes everybody really talk about the newspaper. But even modern historians agree that investigators discovered numerous bizarre architectural features that had no legitimate explanation. Then there were the disappearances. At first, nobody connected them. Why would they? People came and went constantly in Chicago. People come and go to Chicago all the time, even in modern day. A missing employee here and a former tenant there, a woman who moved away without telling anyone. Nothing like that seems extraordinary and seemed extraordinary back then, until investigators started tracing the patterns and discovered that many of those people visiting had one thing in common. They somehow had been connected with Holmes. One of the earliest names frequently associated with Holmes was Julia Connor. Now, Julia worked in the building and was married to a man who operated a jewelry store there. By accounts, Holmes developed a relationship with her. Whether it began as an affair, maybe a manipulation of some kind, or something more, sinister from the very beginning, it still remains unclear. What is clear is that Julia eventually vanished, and so did her young daughter, Pearl. Friends expected to hear from them. However, no letters arrived. No confirmed sightings emerged. They simply disappeared. Holmes offered explanations. He always had explanations, of course. One of those smooth talkers. Perhaps they moved away. Perhaps they started a new life elsewhere. The various stereotypical answers. Sadly, their fate remains one of the most haunting mysteries tied to Holmes. Then came another woman, and another, and another. Many were employees, some were stenographers, others were secretaries. Several reportedly became engaged to Holmes, which was particularly alarming because Holmes was often already married. In fact, throughout much of his life, he maintained multiple relationships simultaneously. He lied effortlessly and created false identities. For Holmes, people were tools. Still, just an opportunity. Useful until they weren't. And they often seemed to just vanish, just like the first ones. One former employee recalled Holmes as charming and attentive, just like the other people described. Another described him as manipulative. Many who met him spoke on his remarkable ability to earn trust, as is common with many serial killers. Even someone, just as one example, like Bundy. He had what some say, a trustable face, but he would pretend to have an arm or broken or an injury. I need help moving XYZ, and people would just go for it. So just one of those things. The victims who entered Holmes's orbit were reckless. Most believe they had met an educated professional who could offer them employment, opportunity, or companionship. Instead, they had stepped into the web of a predator. As the World's Fair drew closer, The flow of visitors increased. The boardrooms inside Holmes's building filled with travelers. Strangers arrived carrying suitcases and dreams. What they couldn't know was that some of these guests would become part of a mystery that would endure, again, for more than a century. A trail of fraud, deception, and murder would begin stretching across the United States. A trail that would eventually expose one of the most notorious killers in American history. As H. Holmes' ambition grew, so did the scale of his schemes. In 1894, he recruited his associate, Benjamin Pitzel, into an insurance fraud plot that involved faking Pitzel's death to collect a substantial payout. The original plan called for a staged accident using a cadaver, but authorities later concluded Holmes abandoned the ruse and murdered Pitzel instead. His body was discovered in Philadelphia, badly burned and left to resemble an accidental explosion. Even more chilling, Holmes convinced Pitzel's widow to trust him with 3 of her children while the fraud was supposedly being arranged. The decision would have devastating consequences. The disappearance of the Pitzel children remain one of the darkest chapters in the story of H. Holmes. After the murder of Benjamin, Holmes manipulated Benjamin's widow into allowing him to travel with 3 of her children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, under the guise of helping execute the insurance scheme. For months, Holmes moved the children across multiple cities, keeping them separated from their mother and constantly changing locations. When investigators finally unraveled his trail, they discovered a horrifying truth. All 3 children had been murdered. Their tragic fate shocked the nation and ultimately helped expose Holmes's deadly web of lies. When police and investigators entered H. Holmes's so-called murder castle, they uncovered a scene that seemed like it was pulled from a nightmare. Hidden rooms, secret passageways, trapdoors, and windowless chambers, like we talked about, stretched throughout the building like a maze designed to conceal dark secrets. In the basement, investigators discovered human bones, partial remains, and evidence that some bodies had been stripped of flesh. Surgical tables, dissection tools, chemical vats, and a cremation furnace fueled suspicions that Holmes had used his medical knowledge to destroy evidence. As workers searched deeper into the castle, each grisly discovery revealed another layer of horror hidden behind these very ordinary-looking walls. The reign of terror attributed to H. Holmes came to an end on May 7th, 1896, when he was executed by hanging at a prison in Philadelphia for the murder of Benjamin. Even in his final days, Holmes remained an enigma, offering confessions that contradicted one another and claiming responsibility for dozens of deaths, some involving people who were later found to still be alive. These inconsistencies fueled endless speculation about the true extent of his crimes. Before his execution, Holmes reportedly requested that his coffin be buried beneath 10 feet of concrete, fearing that grave robbers would exhume his body. That unusual request only added to the growing mythology surrounding him. In the decades that followed, rumors spread that Holmes had escaped execution, bribed officials, or secretly assumed yet another identity. And none of these claims were ever substantiated, but they helped transform him from a notorious murderer into a near legendary figure of American folklore. Today, Holmes's legacy exists in the uneasy space between documented history and some sort of sensational myth. While historians continue to debate the true number of his victims and separate fact from exaggeration, the story of the murder castle and its charismatic architect remains one of the most chilling chapters in the history of true crime. As we've heard tonight, the story of H. Holmes is more than just a tale of murder. It's a chilling reminder that some of history's darkest monsters don't hide in the shadows. They walk among ordinary people, earning trust with a smile while concealing horrors behind closed doors. More than a century later, the truth about Holmes remains tangled in a web of fact, rumor, and legend, leaving us to wonder how many secrets truly died with him. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is that somewhere beneath the myths and newspaper headlines lies a reality even darker than the stories that I talked about tonight. Thank you for joining me for tonight's episode. For more creepy content and to learn about becoming a Patreon Creep Nation member, head over to creepyconfidential.com. And stay creepy, my friends, and I'll catch you next time right here on Creepy Confidential.